Our session, we have another ambassador, though retired. However, as usually they say, ambassadors are never former. So with great pleasure, I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Gheorghe Magheru, who represents the leading Romanian think tank, New Strategy Center, that is also official partner of our Caucasus Institute in Romania, and we are their partner here in Armenia. I had pleasure to communicate with Ambassador Magheru in many occasions, many times during my date in Bucharest, and I am confident that, as usual, Ambassador will have a very professional and comprehensive speech on prospects of the wider Black Sea region in the context of the global crises. Excellenza, vă rog.
Thank you very much, Ambassador and dear friend. In line with your introductory message, I would like to highlight first the cooperation between our two partner think tanks. We are actually a family of think tanks surrounding the Black Sea, littoral, so to say, or as Armenia is at crossroads between the Black Sea and the Caspian, but we are part of the same family. One of the basis of my intervention today, I must explain that thanks to the director of the Caucasus Institute, Mr. Iskandarian, we are part of a project which is today a beginning of brainstorming, which will finalize in a paper where various visions will be reflected, trying to capture the picture of the region today. When I was invited to take part in this project, Mr. Iskandarian told me try to bring a vision from the West, considering that Romania is the NATO EU country on the western shores of the Black Sea. Now, I was thinking where to start by finding the common denominator for such a theme which can be approached in various angles, from the immediate to the long-term and broad picture. And looking in time, I came to the conclusion that nothing comes out of the blue. Today we are living what Professor Baev was mentioning, the geopolitical reconfiguration, and that we usually have to start with geopolitics. I was tempted to do the same thing, but I realized that in our context, if we try to understand ourselves, because each of our countries in this part of the world, Professor Baev mentioned Russia, how to say, facing its own destiny, which it has been doing for so many centuries in relation to Europe and later on also to the United States and China. But it's a question about relating to ourselves, countries which have for a long time aspired to materialize their identity in a constructive project. I would like to suggest to go back to the 19th century and the beginning, the idea of evolution from peoples to nations and states. And the common denominator here is that with the first, how to say, stage of globalization incarnated in the 19th century, which was the peak or the apogee of what is called in traditional terms imperialism. Countries in Central Eastern Europe and the Balkans were confronted with the challenge of modernization. And I want here to bring to your attention another region which is probably less familiar, but it's so close to the South Caucasus, the Balkans. And a country like Romania, which is midway between the Balkans, Central Europe, Danube, Eastern Europe, we have the longest terrestrial border with Ukraine, as also with Moldova. And practically we are neighbors with Turkey, holding the straits, completing the EU-NATO picture from with Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey, the first NATO member amongst us, and then going to across the sea to Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. And what is the common link? At the beginning of the 90s, a Serbian anthropologist the American Serbian anthropologist depicted the Balkans as the first and last Europe. And I thought that this formula, first and last Europe, could also be enlarged to the Caucasus, because here is the problem of the mental incorporation into the historical and political consciousness of Europe of the South Caucasus, as it was historically with our part of the world. This anthropologist quoted a Romanian sociologist in the year of the foundation of the Romanian kingdom in 1881. He made a very deep analysis of the social economic conditions of Romania at that time, the kingdom of Romania, and the conclusion was that either we modernize along Western model or pattern, or we are going to fail. And this idea of modernization has been practically the driver for the history of our part of the world, with all the other concurrent trends, great power competitions, world wars, revolutions, and so on. Another Romanian historian of culture and leading specialist in Southeast Europe, wrote recently, and for a great academician, he passed away a couple of years ago, Răzvan Todorescu, a great personality. Yes, we had a discussion about that family tree, and great family, by the way. He wrote a book trying to identify the several underground streams of the Romanian identity, and he said, we are part of that process from two Europes to one. And I thought that these patterns applying to Southeast Europe can be translated to the South Caucasus. And to this extent, I will take another how to say, landmark, which I think is necessary to build up the common frame of approaching our destiny in the European construction, which has not been clarified, I think, yet, in spite of the fact that we have the European strategy in the making. We have NATO presence in the Black Sea, but it's the problem of our project. And here I will turn again back, this time to Central Europe, and to the national project started with the before the 1848 revolutions. I think we were discussing last night about General Paškević and the Hungarian revolution, the defeat of the Romanian revolution in 1848, at the appeal of the Habsburg emperor. It is very interesting because it was another period where the westernization of Eastern Europe had, how to say, a great impulse. And then you had again, as usually it happens, a settling down of the balance between the great powers. And at that time, it was the question between the Tsarist Empire, the Ottoman Empire on one side, and the great Western powers on the other side, which have fled to the Crimean War. But this is not the point. The point is that you had a national movement from Poland to what is today the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Croatia, Serbia, and so on, which has matured and which has burst, so to say, in 1918. If I come to 1918, you will come to the first republics in the South Caucasus, Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. I don't have to tell you, you know better than me your history with Stalin and Orjonikidze crossing the northern Caucasus. But I think this is very important because you had the Ukrainian Republic, you had the revolution, October Revolution, and you had the liberation of the jail of the peoples, as Lenin was saying, and we know the results. And Mr. Bayev pointed out today's outcome, so to say. Why I mention this, usually it is wiser to avoid history. But in this case, it is a must to mention history, because in this way, I think we see better that we have been part of a long process which has not ended and which has not yet attained its final end. If we look at things from this perspective, maybe what seems today to be gloom and doom, because we are living a very difficult moment in international relations, and we are living dilemmas, incertitudes related to our fate here in the region, where we have the war of aggression against of Russia against Ukraine, but with all the consequences for the neighbors, be they on the eastern side of the Black Sea or the western side, such as those of us who are UN NATO members and are so-called frontline joining Ukraine. If we come to the present day, we have to make another stopover with the end of the Cold War, because with the end of the Cold War, Armenia, Georgia and Azerbaijan have regained their independence, as well as Ukraine and all the other members of the CIS. And they have started a new period in their own development, and what can be said, their modernization. And this modernization is inseparable for what Professor Iskandarian was saying, the West. But now we have to define what is this West. Here I think we can get even closer. We were discussing yesterday that even the definition of the South Caucasian republics as European has been the subject of a political dispute in the early 90s as to whether the three republics can be considered European or not, because there was a dispute, a political dispute around concerning several encyclopedic sources, some attributing the South Caucasus to Asia. If the South Caucasian republics were considered to be Asian, then the status of institutions such as the Council of Europe, which you joined with Georgia first, then Armenia and Azerbaijan, you wouldn't have been able to postulate for membership of the Council of Europe, or as today Armenia is going to organize a referendum on the European perspective, not fulfilling the criteria of the European Union, which is open to European Union membership. So you realize the interpretation of a map, what geopolitical consequences it had. For those of you who are have the passion of history, it was a dispute between a British encyclopedia published in Chicago and a French encyclopedia and Merriman's in England, and the dilemma was solved by a British parliamentarian, David Atkinson, who opted for the European encyclopedias instead of the so-called British encyclopedia edited in Chicago, which in its turn was considered to reflect the positions of the Soviet geographers at the beginning of the Soviet Union. So, how to say, this is, maybe it seems amusing, but it is not, because hadn't you joined at that time the Council of Europe, then your further relations with the European Union and with NATO would have taken another turn. Now, we have gone through, all of us, through this long process. We can maybe draw a line today for the 35 years since the reunification of Germany with the fall of the Berlin Wall, and subsequently 1991 the crumbling of the Soviet system and the Soviet Union, by that matter. What happened next? There was a dilemma. What is going to happen? In the Black Sea, the Russian Federation, with the near abroad policy and so on, you had this chain of frozen conflicts, starting from the west, from Transnistria, going through Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and with the Russian Federation balancing between Armenia and Azerbaijan on the heritage of Stalin, which you know much better than I, and the hardships for both peoples on resulting from this long-lasting conflict. So you had this sizzling or brewing tensions in the Black Sea, in the condition in which there was no geopolitical clarity as to the future step. In the meantime, the European Union, in its own internal processes, managed in the summit meeting in Essen in 1993 to define the conditions of enlargement. And then you had a difficult process of enlargement of the European Union, which has reached, included the Baltic states, Poland, the Czech Republic. And here again, I have to mention that it was not only that you had new states resulting from the Soviet Union, but you had the peaceful separation of the Czech and Slovak republics and the war in former Yugoslavia. So it was not in 1990 peace for all times, as Chamberlain said in Munich in 1938, the making or birth of the new Europe, post-Cold War, was very difficult, and it happened again where things used to happen in the Balkans, where you had, how to say, a bunch of, not of flowers, but of new states, starting from Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, North Republic of Macedonia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and later on Kosovo. Again, I think it is useful from your angle here to look at what happened in that our part of Europe, because it is useful to study as patterns of both nation building, state building, institution building, and at the same time conflict prevention and conflict solution, because you have the pattern of ethnic, religious, cultural, historical, territorial, unsettled issues of peoples having lived for a very long time together, sharing so much more in common than in their divisions. And then you have to see why it all happened. Now, after going to this part of the story, we have to reach the NATO enlargement in its first stages. And then you get to 2008, to the Bucharest summit in 2008, where Ukraine and Georgia made a strong bid to get membership action plan, and in order to open the perspective for NATO accession. I attended that summit. What happened? In August 2008, the Russian Federation invaded Georgia. Fortunately, they stopped before they reached Tbilisi. The consequences are still to be seen today. And as our Ukrainian neighbor said, it was a repetition for what was going to happen in 2014. Now, here again, we have to look at the evolution, both in Ukraine and the South Caucasus. We might recall that you had the big Maidan in 2003-2004, and then subsequently you had the moment of the Partnership for East, which was initiated by the European Union in 2008 after Georgia. And at that time, Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan were invited to join the Eastern Partnership on a status of association agreement and so on. What happened, you know very well. You had another big Maidan, what the Ukrainians, and I see our ambassador, I think, Romanian ambassador who is present here was at that time in Kiev. We met at that time. You had this countering the drive of the Ukrainian people to Europe, because this time it was not NATO, it was Europe, the relation with the European Union, and the reaction of the Russian Federation to this very important step which Ukraine was ready to take in its relation with the European Union, which is important. Why? Because it was the question of the reform of the Ukrainian society and overcoming the heritage of a system which was not yet reformed. With all that it takes, we have gone through this difficult process of negotiations for accession because you have very difficult standards. And I think you will go to the same road if you join the European Union. Now, you had, after the Maidan and what the Ukrainians call the revolution of dignity, you had, how to say, this, I don't know how to call it, this bomb, February 2022, which has remade the cards in the region. Why I am telling you this story? Because in the conclusions or preliminary conclusions to the paper I am going to give you, I am making of summary of what the European Union has statutorily done in relation to this region, what is the NATO presence in this region, and what are the expectations for the next stage. And I say, if our opening thesis is correct and the long-term dominant trend in the region has no alternative to modernization, governments and societies in the region must mobilize to hold a rudder firmly on course and promote country projects oriented towards the future. So the idea of country project. The last part of my conclusion, which are longer, is that if you are to accomplish your own national projects, then if one is concerned to preserve the westward trend of the Black Sea riparian states in such testing times, the strengthening of bilateral relations and NATO and EU members and their presence in the region is a must, alongside the promotion of relevant strategies of the Euro-Atlantic community. Mr. Bayev, I think, mentioned that the major powers are not present. My conclusion was that not only the Euro-Atlantic community, but every individual country which realizes it has a stake for Europe has to invest in this region. So finally, the ambition to upgrade the level of ambition of the region by countries therein themselves is an indispensable precondition involving not one, but more generations. So that's all.
Thank you.